I'm tying the sex man. So this is kind of a combination of Gallup's Sex Dungeon and Boogeyman, and then yeah, especially with this tail, incorporating some stuff that I like from the Drunk. And not that it matters, even though I think it kind of does, but that flash combination is a couple different talking and doing stuff at the same time. Flash combination is Krennic, copper, Krennic gold, copper flashaboo, silver flashaboo, opal flashaboo, silver and gold holographic flashaboo. It shows up in the water. Do I want to? Yeah. I was going to counter rib this thing, but the reason I am tying this, along with a bunch of others, is because of the number of, well, first of all, the number of eats for a very new to fly fishing angler. On this fly, it's easy to cast. It's one of the reasons I think that the Dungeon is as big fish catching as it is, as its reputation says it is. It's a big enough profile to require or demand attention when it's in the water. Not so big that it's going to put off smaller fish, big enough to get the attention of bigger fish. And this is ice dub, shrimp pink, copper, tan, and just 3. So big enough to demand attention, not so big that it's going to put off all fish. But the size and just a little bit of air resistance from the deer hair with the Dungeon-like flies, along with the weight of the eyes, it's a balance that allows you to cast something that has enough momentum to get somewhere, but isn't collapsing your line like you feel with, tungsten-headed flies or sculpin helmet flies. And when you have that combination of things, which is a big enough fly and something that is very castable, and it's actually fun. It's fun to cast. You can see it in the water. It's big enough to see. You can see it move. You can watch the kills. I'm falling apart here. It's okay, though. It's all right. We're going to be okay. When all of that happens, that fly ends up in the water more, and it's fished for an extra strip or two. That first strip is maybe a little harder. You start getting casts that are, I want a little more body on that. You start getting casts that are just a little sportier, getting to the tighter places, even if it's just an extra 2 feet, man. That's the difference. That's the difference between not just a big fish. It's the difference between a fish that is not going to eat because something is 2 feet away and your fly is 1 foot from the current seam. It's inside the slack water, but it's not next to the bank. If you get an extra 2 feet right next to the bank, you're going to have 2 or 3 strips to convince that fish to eat. And that happens more often when you have a fly that can be casted well. It's, I think, a reason. If bigger flies were easier to cast and they were the exact same profile of fish, when you get up to bigger flies, you have to make the profile giant, because big flies are, even 8-10 inch rainbows are large. They're harder to cast. You're not getting as many casts. Streamer fishing from a drift boat, especially, it can be pretty bang bang. You're getting 1 or 2 shots, maybe 2 shots in some of these tight places, and so getting a 4 to 6 inch fly that is easily castable, especially if you're not used to big rods and very heavy line, it's a good way to put yourself in a position to entice a fish. What the fuck was I talking about? So I want the wiggle, which is why I'm doing flash instead of marabou. There's less mass in the back. And less mass, I've also been getting in the habit of doing like a tapered flash tail instead of just straight. Movement in the water from materials is due to friction. And friction is due to energy loss. So when you have something with a bunch of marabou on it, or a long rabbit strip or whatever, and this is why the drunk is such an awesome fly, and Tommy doesn't really talk about all this stuff or brag about it. It's just he does talk about it, but you have to pick it out. Just doing flash and just doing the flash body without other natural materials and just the collar of rabbit, it allows so much movement of the back hook. I don't care about movement within the materials. Movement within the materials reduces movement of the actual rear segment itself. So the marabou, I'm not going full tilt on that concept here because I'm doing the schlopping. But the flash in the back it's going to put out enough of a profile of a fishtail, and then of course with all the flash, but it allows that fly to wiggle in the back, both during the strip and during the kill. Hook is in the vise. That's where my brain's at. And I'm not going super deep for the typical jig, strip flies, whatever you want to call them, the weighted flies. I am, if it's a cone head, largely speaking, especially for my own fishing, I'm doing tungsten. I always have the brass counterparts, just because, newer anglers, that tungsten can feel, well, it'll end up in the back of someone's head because it collapses leader. It's also just less fun to cast. But I typically do the large lead eyes. These are medium. And I wanted to orient and just tip. I'm going to use deer here too, but I just want it to tip down a little bit. I don't necessarily need it sinking. Most of the eats, especially on the flies that I really like, I'm watching it happen, and it has less to do with the color and more to do with where it is in the water column, which is to say not very low. scientific measurement there. Dude, I swear to God, I get some amount of stuff ready for quote-unquote filming, and I'm also starting to get into the habit of using 3 beads. I used to not like tying game changers. I used to like olive more than I do now. None of this stuff's set in stone. And these are just, these are actually 4mm Amazon, 20 bucks or something for 1,000. I like the 5mm too, but I'm out of them because I like them so much. With the 4mm beads and 7-strand 024, it's rigid enough because that 7-strand for these beads to, even when they're mashed up in the back, they're leaving a nice little pocket for that hook, or for that hook eye. So you can have this out, and it's rigid enough to not want to come back around to the leader or to the front of the fly, or back around to the bottom. Of course, it's still going to happen. But that 024, I'm not relying on the wire to wiggle like this. I'm relying on the wire to hold my rear hook so that it can move freely. And just to make that point even more clear, less about making the point clear, more about something that I do, but it is making the point clear. I'll put a couple wraps of thread just around that little piece to keep that part rigid, so that it's less prone to wrap down or around the hook. And then after I do that, I'll hit it with some epoxy or resin, whatever you want to call it. That piece of thread that's hanging off down the hook bend is probably going to destroy all fish catching ability with this fly. But you know what? I live dangerous. Yeah, speaking of things that I used to not do as much and now I do, and vice versa, wire around these eyes, regardless of the size. That's becoming almost a non-starter to do anything differently, because a big pet peeve of mine is when eyes, it's because, again, if you're moving something, there are some days where I feel like I could tie this to a hook of any size, and as long as I'm moving it the right way, which is probably really, really fast, combined with completely still, as long as I'm moving it the right way, if that bites on, they're going to eat something that's moving like that. If it's moving like a crawfish or an injured baitfish, it's going to get eaten. But for fly tying purposes, if I'm putting eyes on the bottom, I'm finding GSP. If I'm putting eyes on the bottom of my fly for a specific reason, I want them to stay there, right in front of me. And I'm switching to GSP here so that I am going to end up doing hair, but I can cinch around those wires. Another thing, if you tighten those eyes, especially these new lead eyes, they're not straight on the bottom, which because they have a V, they're sloping on each side. it guides your thread into the center. And if you put 3 or 4 wraps of GSP, instead of being distributed across a flat piece of lead, it's distributed over one piece, over one thread diameter. And if you give that a cinch, your eyes are going to split in two. And I had heard Kelly Gallup say that, and it never happened, but it's because I was using flat eyes and 140. Even with deer hair, you can use the 140. But that GSP will, it might not happen on the vise, but it absolutely will occur. It's pretty remarkable that I still think of, doing this. I tied some marabou versions. Like, yeah, you know what? I'm going to do this one version. Make a quick video. Hit the water. It's probably going to end up being 45 minutes. Or not. I don't know. Connection cover. Marabou. Some of that woolly bugger marabou just has a nice sheen to it. Feel free to put in some, peach or red or yellow or black, whatever. If you look at conventional tackle, I'll look at a fly and think, does that look good? Which is a part of fishing. You want something to look good. You want to have confidence in it. But good is super subjective. Look at conventional fishing, and trout aren't, the presentation does not need to be like more natural or smarter than bass. They aren't smarter. They're fish. They have very small brains. So it's just something to think about. I'm sort of, my relationship with it is developing, and I hope it will always continue to develop. But some of the, black over white, some of the big musky baits, even the smaller bass stuff where you just have, it's, the classic saltwater where it's just red for the front fifth and then all white. You don't see a lot of flies tied like that in it because it looks weird. I would say bad, but it looks funky. Flopping. So again, feel free to put in some. I would lead by example, but I'm not going to. I like to do a 1/4 inch of feather left over there with not super tight or super wound GSP wraps, like 5 or 6 of those. Cinch that up. If you just do 1 or 2 and put a whip in and cinch it up, you're just going to cut through the feather that you tied on. Oh, shout out to Vivas for making spools that sound like nails on a chalkboard, and for making thread that... Alright, I'll stop. Cool, cool. Yeah, kidding me, dude. GSP 100. It's really strong unless you touch it. I have so many spools that are ruined. Thinking about making some sort of... It'd be more of a pain, but it would be kind of funny to make like a changer or something. Shred up all the GSP off the spools. Counter ribbing was a non-starter, I should say. Not counter ribbing was a non-starter. A lot of that schlopping ended up backwards, but whatever. When your non-schloppany stuff like this ends up backwards, is less ideal. But when the schloppany stuff ends up backwards, it retains bulk and gets matted down good enough. Again, the attitude of good enough is something I do not subscribe to for most tying. Mentioned at the beginning of this, kind of fresh off of a day of donating about, I don't know, 10 or 12 this type streamer. I'm going to do a little more bulk and a little more flash. So the notion of durability when they're being put into trees, and you know, you can kind of, I've been maxing out my test at 16. 20 becomes a situation where, especially with the flexible branch, where it's not coming off and it's the line wrapped around, it's not the hook. You can't bend the hook out, you can't break the line. I can drop the oars and give it a lot of heat, but most anglers who aren't used to a situation like that, it can make a pretty normal situation turn somewhat dangerous pretty quickly when you have someone looking out for their fly rod or my fly rod. And 20 pounds of force when I'm rowing is a good bit. So fishing a lot of fast water, small margins, you just, if you get a bad hang up, you have to snap it off. You can work on your casting and not hang up as much, but it's part of the game. That was 2 mallard flanks tied on at the same damn time. I wouldn't mind if those went back just a little further. Maybe to here. But I also don't care a whole lot because I'm going to tie 2 or 3 more of these things and they won't be in my box in the next month. So this back one where it catches water, the flash, that movement, the articulation point, this does track, it helps track. I like the bulk in here to give it the, the teardrop shape when it's in the water. Somewhat less concerned about these two than I am about the collar, to a certain degree, the rest of the head, and then just having those eyes right there. Oh, and we're going to add a couple things to this guy. One is going to be your indicator. If you are losing this, if the water's off color or whatever. It's kind of a drunk thing. Now with the drunk, with the mallards off to the side and the way it moves because of the head, it's wobbling. So you get these flash points that are very, very exaggerated and visible, especially a fish. This does some tipping. But that flash is going to be riding mostly on top. You will get it. It's not like a main feature of this fly, even though I sure dig it. I like flash in the water. The reason it's not a main feature is that I'll go ahead and make the claim that at least for the way we're fishing, your eats are happening because a predator from below is coming up and attacking, trying to kill the fly. It's not that you're getting it on a bank and then swimming it out and something is chasing it and eating it from behind. Smacking on top of the bank, moving it, and this thing that's below is coming up and coming out and then coming up. So again, the tip and wobble, the chuck, that can be effective when you have a fish that is engaged and you need to give it one extra reason. But it just looks good in the water. The flash, that is, you can see it. You can see when you can see every time you stop. That flash is telling you when your fly is stopping. And if you're getting a bow in your line and dragging it down the bank and it just looks like a bright stick moving down the bank, you're also going to see that. A little bit of attitude there. Yeah, you're right. This part's unnecessary, but I do it. Ooh, we're going to get real sporty here. I feel like Bob Ross. Deer hair is both durable and buoyant and tapered. So I retract both. It's not, you know, a lot of deer hair that you get is going to be brittle, but that's because it's part of the processing for a lot of the larger companies, and that's because they're doing so much of it. And to get vibrant colors, you have to hit it with bleach, and bleach is another way of saying hydrogen peroxide and ammonia. You have to, especially since with the amount they're doing, it's also sanitary to do that, and it reduces smell and a bunch of other stuff. Even at that stage, when it feels brittle, after it gets wet, or if you apply some of your daughter's conditioning spray to it, it's not going, it becomes back to what it was, which is protection for an animal. And you know, this is not, same with mallard flanks. They're two things that are very, very strong. So the collar that moves water, which is another way of saying it displaces water, which is another way of saying it's buoyant. And when you put something buoyant in water, there is a force that acts on it. Sorry if that triggers you from me getting scientific. But it's the same thing as, you know, if you have a balloon and you put it into a bucket of water, there's going to be some water that comes out. And if you have a big collar here, you have to worry less about making your head dense. And this is going to give you a lot of the action, a lot of that water displacement, and a lot of that buoyancy riding on top. So you have to rely much less on this front part. Hair clips are great for the smaller stuff when you're putting a collar on. It's interesting the things I get picky about. So one wrap over. Okay, if I lose a couple there. Keeping everything on top. I'll put 4 or 5 more turns. To kind of mash down that collar there. And here's some fun. I can hear it raining outside, and it's causing my brain to short out because I know how fishy it is. So I'm pretty sure to be comfortable enough with deer hair to do this, you need to have tied with deer hair a good bit. And it's just another way of saying this isn't a shortcut for tying a proper dungeon head or a sparsely stacked head. So putting 2 or 3 stacks, one on top, one on bottom, one on top, one on bottom, one on top, one on bottom. This isn't a substitute. If you are there, if you've tied with a bunch of deer hair or enough, or you've practiced, whatever, this is just another way to create a consistent, both a consistent and a sparse hair head. Whenever I try to go for consistency with deer hair, it is only out of laziness. I end up with a head that is too tightly packed, and I could just start with less hair. So I am waxing that thread because the deer hair and the GSP don't like to stick together. Now you don't want to get too rowdy with this. Put in a couple with some tension. If you come from the back here, if you're holding your spinner, and you like move the twists up, I basically just want to get to a place where everything is folding. Get out of here. So you can see these front, that's folding. These aren't, it's a little more dense, but I'm not worried about it. The more you pull there, the more that pressure is going to get to all that deer hair and it's going to fold. The reason you don't want to get super rowdy with that spinning is that if you do and then you pull, everything in the dubbing loop just goes on the floor. With GSP, that is, because that tension with the spinning combined with the pulling, that tension just cuts through all the hair. Yeah, I want to come back around the eyelid. I was thinking about going over here, but not right now. Now, because of this very moment, some of that collar, the butt ends were caught there. Sometimes I'll just do a couple wraps around there, or I'll do a stack and then finish off with the palmering. But I'm gonna walk this back and just make this less of a problem. I'm okay if you trap some hairs in there. You want to avoid it, but since it's in a loop, and I'm wrapping, I mean I'm wrapping very tight with that GSP, and then since I'm wrapping the same way as I am tying with my thread, these last couple turns help to tighten it up, and then the same will happen when I Give it a few whips and press it back just a little bit. And those little whip finishes, 3, 4, 5 whips, along with the tightening back, it just squishes that stuff up. I'll get you. Gotcha. Oh, 2461s. As noted earlier, all of this is subject to change, but I've been a pretty big fan of B10S's that, you know, I tied with a lot of AREX and Partridge, and, you know, the CS86. The CS86 is a great hook for trout. The CS86X is a great hook for muskie. But that 2461, especially for these articulated bugger type platforms, the 3X long hook, it's a great hook. And then for smaller flies, like if you're tying with a, you know, 1 or a 2 in the front, that Gamakatsu B10S in a 6 or a 4, if trout even smell it, it's in their face. And I will do a little bit more of a slope here than the typical dungeon head. It's almost like got some cougar feel to it. And then we're back to the eyes. After cutting off the bottom flush, I'm going bone dry right on that wire connection. I really dislike when they move around. I also dislike when my rubber legs, I'm using them in the front to give it some wiggle. That is the rubber legs moving forward and backwards as you're stripping and killing. I don't like them to interfere with my back hook. I'm also going to cut in some taper. The sex man.